Welcome back to Queens of the Damned, a horror podcast. This week, we're reaching deep into our rotting bookworm hearts to recommend 6 fantastic fiction, true crime, and death studies reads. Make sure to leave your recommendations for us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Gmail. Rachel will read them, Nikki will buy them all intending to read them, and Miranda might get around to them someday. Enjoy. So, my first pick, actually, both of my picks are nonfiction, and they're both old meaning 5 to 15 years old. I know people will have heard of them, but I've never heard anyone talk about them more than just in passing, so I think I'm good. And nonfiction for me, wasn't a genre I was into as much when I was younger, but I've come to buy probably as much, if not more, nonfiction than fiction nowadays in my old age of 26. So if you think you don't enjoy nonfiction, maybe you just haven't found the right book yet. There's a ton of different ones out there, and authors are pretty much writing about these really important issues in a friendly and very accessible way. So the first one I chose, I would call it anti-horror nonfiction. It's called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory by Caitlin Doughty, and it was published in 2014. I chose this rather than more current death studies books because I'm not exactly sure how familiar our listeners are with Caitlin Doughty's work. I know I've talked about her on this podcast before, and you probably know her YouTube show, Ask a Mortician. But this was her first book, and you need to read it if you don't know anything about her. But she is the founder of the Order of the Good Death, which is an organization of scholars, morticians, and artists who believe the culture of silence surrounding death should be broken through discussion, gatherings, art, innovation, and scholarship. And this book is a memoir of how she became interested in the funeral industry and how she began to notice that our culture, meaning Western culture, has some pretty negative and evasive attitudes surrounding death, dying, and the dead body. But she tells this with so much wit and humor and respect that she kind of eases you into this difficult subject and makes you feel safe there with her as a kind of tour guide to your mortality. And I'm just going to read an excerpt of it because her voice is so unique and funny. And this is the very, very beginning of the book, the first 2 pages. A girl always remembers the first corpse she shaves. It is the only event in her life more awkward than her first kiss or the loss of her virginity. The hands of time will never move quite so slowly as when you are standing over the dead body of an elderly man with a pink plastic razor in your hand. Under the glare of fluorescent lights, I looked down at poor, motionless Byron for what seemed like a solid 10 minutes. That was his name, or so the toe tag hung around his foot informed me. I wasn't sure if Byron was a he, a person, or an it, a body, but it seemed like I should at least know his name for this most intimate of procedures. Byron was, or had been, a man in his 70s with thick white hair sprouting from his face and head. He was naked, except for the sheet I kept wrapped around his lower half to protect. I'm not sure what. Post-mortem decency, I suppose. His eyes, staring up into the abyss, had gone flat like deflated balloons. If a lover's eyes are a clear mountain lake, Byron's were a stagnant pond. His mouth twisted open in a silent scream. Hey, Mike? I called out to my new boss from the body preparation room. So I guess I should use, shaving cream, or... Mike walked in, pulled a can of Barbasol from a metal cabinet, and told me to watch out for nicks. We can't really do anything if you slice open his face, so be careful, huh? Yes, be careful. Just as I'd been careful all those other times I had given someone a shave. Which was never. So... That's what she hits you with right away. It's great all the way through. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry. I highly recommend it. And actually, I'm kind of cheating because I'm adding another one in here, which is her second book, but I haven't read it in full yet, so I can't really say a lot about it. but it's called From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death, and it was released more recently in 2017. She basically here takes a look at funerary practices and cultures all over the world, and I think part of its purpose is to normalize a more intimate approach to this whole affair, like that really Western culture, instead of being the standard for death practices as we sometimes think we are, is the anomaly and the weird thing. So I think, okay, I'm biased, and I kind of force the death positive thing on people, but I think her books are books for everybody, and everybody should read them. So, that's my first one.
Good pick.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
I've never read anything by her. Yeah, but it does sound cool.
They're quick, too.
Okay, it sounds interesting.
I didn't even think of nonfiction for this episode. And then once you mentioned that, I was like, oh, there's a book I could have done.
Yeah, I did one fiction and one nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
We should do more of these.
We should. Yeah. I think it's fun.
Yeah.
And I think that it's good to do things that are only like, you know, like I wouldn't call the Caitlin Doherty book horror, but I would call
anti-horror.
It adjacent. Well, and I would call it adjacent.
Yeah.
Especially because for a lot of people, I mean, I know she's about death positivity, but for a lot of people, death is the ultimate fear.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly.
That's the ultimate
that's
horror.
The weird thing.
Yeah.
That's the weird thing, right, is that when I go into horror studies and death studies like this, it ends up being the opposite. It ends up me being me and others who are like-minded trying to reverse the horror that is in some things.
Right, exactly.
So.
Exactly. And I think the death positive movement is like, again, the ultimate example, because I think I read somewhere that like the number 2 fear, like the number 2 most commonly cited phobia is death.
Mm-hmm.
What's number 1?
Public speaking.
No way.
Yeah.
People are more scared of public speaking than they are of death.
Yes, I think because death seems like, for a lot of people, sort of a, you know, like a concept, right? Like, well, I'm not going to die tomorrow, but I am going to have to give a speech tomorrow.
That's
true. That's like a concrete thing that you really feel like might happen, you know?
And here Caitlin Doherty is giving public speeches about death.
Exactly. She's combining everyone's worst fears.
So, my first pick was Nosferatu by Joe Hill. It came out in 2013, which it's a lot it's older than I thought it was. It's not old, but like for some reason I thought it was fairly recent, but time has gotten away from me, apparently. So Nosferatu was, I think, one of the first books in a long time that actually like scared me or made me incredibly uncomfortable, and I want to say I had nightmares while I was reading this book. So it's, I think, always going to be a favorite of mine. But it is about this man named Charles Manx. He is kidnapping children and taking them to a place that he calls Christmas Land, which Manx has created with his mind. And when he takes the kids there, he pretty much just sucks the life out of them to sustain his own life. And Victoria, the main character, finds out when she's a child that she can travel wherever she wants through a covered bridge. So when she's a kid, she meets Charles, but she isn't kidnapped. But then as an adult, her son is taken, and so she has to track him down to save her son. And like I said, this book it's so creepy. Like, the description of the children when she meets the children in Christmas Land is horrifying. They're really scary little monsters. And the ending scene of the book where you like finally see Christmas Land in its entirety and you see all of the kids that he's taken, it's really a terrifying scene. So I guess I don't have a ton to say about this book because I don't want to give a lot of it away. I already feel like I've given I've said too much. But I'm super excited because it's going to be a TV series on June 2nd on AMC, which is the day before my birthday. So
It's fate.
yes, it's like a birthday present to me. And honestly, like Stephen King books always come out around my birthday. So it's not really a coincidence that his son's book is being turned into a series the day before my birthday. Just saying. That is just how the world works at this point, apparently. But yes. Yeah, I didn't pull any excerpts. I actually don't own this book, so I wouldn't have been able to do that. But I highly recommend it. I honestly like Joe Hill's writing more than Stephen King's, which I feel like is sacrilege. But
That's okay.
just like his writing style, I think I like better.
I will
don't
say,
know.
like with Joe Hill, I will say that Horns has stuck with me in a way, which I know that I've talked about Horns and sung its praises in an episode of this podcast before, but Horns has stuck with me in a way that a Stephen King book has never stuck with me. Not
Right.
that I don't think about Stephen King books that I've read often, because I do, but it just didn't have that like emotional spot in me that maybe The Shining. The Shining is a very emotional book for me.
Yeah.
And so The Shining and Horns kind of both have that special place in my heart. But for Joe Hill, that being like his first novel, that's insane. And the
Yeah.
Nosferatu is his second novel. So amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Or
really
no,
creepy.
I'm sorry, maybe third, because I've never read Heart-Shaped Box.
I really want to read Heart-Shaped Box. I'm going to get around to it eventually.
Is that a novel or is that short stories?
I'm pretty sure it's a novel.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a novel.
Have you
Yeah.
read it?
I have not, but
Okay.
you know what? The funny thing is I have not read anything by Joe Hill yet, but I own all of his books.
Oh my god, I have to read Horns.
What the heck? I don't own any of them. Oh wait, no, I own Strange
Horns
Weather
is-
because I'm reading it.
Horns is very, very soon on my to-read list. I'm kind of going through everything that I collected while I was working at the bookstore right now. Trying not to buy as many books
Yeah. Yeah,
so soon.
Horns was the first one I read, and then I read Nosferatu. We actually got an ARC in at the book rack.
You got
And
in what?
An advanced reader copy.
Oh, okay.
So they send those out for people to like proofread, and then that's how there are like reviews on Amazon on the first day that the book is released.
Mm-hmm.
And someone brought it in, and we're not supposed to sell it. So I took it home and read it and loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I liked The Fireman. It was I didn't like it as much as the other two.
Yeah.
But I did really like it. But still,
Yeah.
I mean, even not liking it as much, it was still amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And Strange Weather was really great, too. I really enjoyed
Yeah.
that one.
I just finished the first story in Strange
Okay.
Weather, and it was so good. Yeah.
Is that the one with the Polaroids?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember which one came first.
Yeah. It was really good. So I'm excited to read the rest of it. But yeah, I loved The Fireman too. That was really good. That one was a lot of fun and not really what I expected.
No, me either.
Yeah.
But I have to admit that I kind of, like, cried at the end.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
that
did.
it was a very emotional book,
I want
which
to say
again
that
I didn't expect.
I feel like I cried at Nosferatu also at the end. Or near the end.
Mhm.
I don't want to say anything because I don't want to ruin it.
I feel
but
like-
I feel like...
I think I did too.
And Horns, I don't know
Yeah.
if I cried, but I felt very emotional reading it.
Yeah.
And also I felt with that one, like, Joe Hill really has some daddy issues.
Oh god.
Well,
Yeah.
you know...
Yeah. I don't know. I think he does a great job. I recommend it to pretty much anyone. If you're into horror and you're looking for something different, then this is it. It's really unlike anything I've read before.
So, my first choice, so I'm going to start with my fiction one. So, I chose a book called The House Next Door by Anne Rivers Siddons.
Oh my god.
Have you read this book, Nikki?
I sure have.
I fucking love this book. I love
It wasn't bad.
this book.
I'm so surprised that that's the one
I
that you...
love this book. So I first heard about this book when I was reading Danse Macabre by Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
He goes on and on and on for like 10 to 15 pages about how much he loves this book. He thinks that it is one of the best, if not the best, horror novel written in the 20th century. And then, within his own book, he contacted Anne Rivers Siddons and had her write like a detailed kind of explanation of some of the novel's themes. Like, that's how much he loved it. So I was like, oh my god, sold. So I also love this book. So this book is told from the point of view of this woman, Cole Kennedy, and she's kind of, upper middle class woman, and she lives with her husband in this really quiet, rich neighborhood in Atlanta. And they learn that in the empty lot next to their house, a new house is going to be built, and it's going to be like kind of this like ugly contemporary home. So they're kind of annoyed because they think that it's going to be hideous and it's going to ruin the neighborhood, and their peace and quiet is going to be gone because now they're going to have these neighbors. But then they meet the architect and the owners, and when they see the plans, they decide that it's going to be this beautiful house. Well, once the people move into the house, bad shit starts happening, and bad stuff happens to everyone who lives in the house. Bad things happen to everyone who visits the house. And so that's kind of the plot of the book. It's definitely an evil house novel. Yes, I think it really has a lot of roots in like Southern Gothic literature.
Yes.
Yes. And it's so funny because Anne Rivers Siddons pretty much only writes now, this is like her only horror novel. Everything else she's ever written are these like drama, Southern books.
Just like family dramas.
Yeah, like family drama books. And this is the only horror novel she's ever written, and I feel like she really hit it out of the park.
She did.
Yeah. So, I mean, the big theme of this book is the fear that people have in the South. I'm going to stereotype a little bit, but I feel like this was her point. I mean, she says this in Danse Macabre. This was her point, is that you have these, like, up-and-coming, rich people in the New South, and they're not scared of, like, monsters or anything like that, but they're scared that their neighbors won't mow their lawn, and then they'll look bad. Or they're scared that, who knows what's going on next door? Who knows what those people are getting up to, right? And so she really taps into that. She taps into that fear of not knowing your neighbors, not knowing who they are. And this fear that people who are from old money, especially in the South, or not even in the South, but in very small towns, have of people who they see as interlopers, like the new money coming in, right? So anyway, that's the big theme of the book. Only it's done as a haunted house story.
Very cool.
See, I don't know how I would have reacted to this if I had not read The Little Stranger first. I don't want to give away the end, but it's a very similar concept, so I guessed what was happening. It's got a big twist at the end, and I guessed what was happening right away. I was like, oh yeah.
It does.
Called
It does. It does have a lot in common with The Little Stranger, but I don't know. I love them both.
Yeah.
I mean, I would...
Well, yeah.
Yeah. I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who liked The Little Stranger, anyone who liked House on Haunted Hill. anyone who likes Twin Peaks, for sure. If you're very into that, you know your neighbors, but do you really know your neighbors type thing, I would really, really, really recommend this book. It's not a hard read. It's very quick. So if you're looking for like a quick, breezy read, I mean, I would really recommend it. I forgot to say, this came out in 1978, so I'm pretty sure I picked the oldest book in the bunch.
Yeah.
But, so it is vaguely 70s. You know, I mean, there are some things in it that are a little bit dated, but nothing horrible. And it's still in print for people who'd like to read it. It is still in print. You can buy it off Amazon or at your local bookstore. Support local businesses. You can order it at the Book Rack for 20% off the publisher's price. If you live in the Quad Cities.
Oh my god.
We do not have it used.
Accidentally filed it underneath like contemporary fiction though, because, or like general fiction, because that when I first found that, it was like mixed in with Low Country and like all her other things. I'm like,
all her other books.
One of these things does not belong here.
Exactly. Like, something about this is different.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is so funny because like I said, I only knew her as the like drama genteel Southern family literature that she writes. And so when I saw that she had a horror novel, I was like, this is gonna fucking suck. And then, like I said, I kept reading all this praise and I thought, well, God, it can't be that bad. And it wasn't. I love it. It's one of my favorite horror books of all time. And I wish they would make a really good movie of it, because they made a really shitty Lifetime movie of it with Mark Paul Gosselaar. And it was horrible.
I watched the shit out of that, even the terrible one. I didn't know they made a movie.
I think I watched it on like the Lifetime Movie Network. And it was not good. But I wish they would make a really good... Maybe... Okay, so I know this next season of Haunting of Hill House, they're doing Turn of the Screw. Maybe season 3, he should do The House Next Door. I am going to email him and say, you can have this idea for free.
Oh my
I
god.
hope that turns out to be a successful anthology series. I know that's getting off topic, but I really hope it does.
I think it will. I think he is so... I find him to be very clever.
Well, now that American Horror Story is tanking...
Oh, people loved last season.
They did?
Yes.
No one I talked to did. I
actually
didn't see it.
Everyone
I'm going to
that
see
I
it, but...
saw online was going bananas for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were like, yes, it's fan service, but who cares? We love it.
Nothing's gonna match season 1.
No. Or season 2.
And now we're way in the weeds.
But yes, we are. But anyway, this book is very good. Don't let her other books turn you off of this book. It comes Rachel recommended, it comes Nikki recommended, it comes Stephen King recommended. Whichever one is most important to you.
I think that I found out about that book through Dance Macabre.
Yep. I feel like most people
do.
do. Because it's so... He just goes on and on and on and on about it. And how much he loves it. So that's really what sold me on reading it.
So my second pick was a true crime novel of sorts, because if you give me a prompt, I will cheat, I guess. It's The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson.
Yay!
And I know so many people have talked about that in the past few years, but I'm recommending it here because the talk that I heard as a bookstore employee misled me about what to expect from this book. I don't know if either of you have read it.
I have not.
You read it? Okay.
I read it like around the time that it came out, when it was like a huge seller.
Yeah, and keep in mind that was like 16 years ago now, which doesn't seem like that should be true, but anyway, I thought the focus was mostly on H.H. Holmes with the 1893 World's Fair as a backdrop. But it was so much more than that. I don't know if people who read it kind of skimmed over the World's Fair bit because they were looking for the true crime aspect. But if they did, they were missing the whole point. Like, these two things go together so well. So what the book actually does is it alternates between the stories of the architects who built the World's Fair and H.H. Holmes. But Eric Larson doesn't really drive home the connection between them. He just sort of lets the two narratives sit side by side. And this kind of results in this beautiful juxtaposition of creation and destruction. And because it's Chicago, at times the lines are blurred and you start asking yourself how much of each narrative is creation and how much is destruction. Another thing I really loved about this book was that it is also a love letter to Chicago. It's extremely Sandberg-esque, and it just delights in Chicago's grittier side and in its reputation as this resilient city where these amazing and almost impossible things were built by people who had very limited technology to do so. I really can't convey what the feeling is of reading this book. But in a really short space, it also shows how messed up H.H. Holmes was. And it makes you really root for his victims, which is something else I really respected. It's easy to glorify a killer like this, America's first serial killer or whatever. But Larson writes in this sort of fictional way. So every time he acquaints you intimately with Holmes's victims, and then he makes you think they might get away. Of course they don't, but he makes you think they might. So I'm just going to read just a tiny excerpt from this one, not as long as the one before. And this is one of the H.H. Holmes chapters. The panic came, as it always did. Holmes imagined Anna, crumpled in a corner. If he chose, he could rush to the door, throw it open, hold her in his arms, and weep with her at the tragedy just barely averted. He could do it at the last minute, in the last few seconds. He could do that. Or he could open the door and look in on Anna and give her a big smile, just to let her know that this was no accident. Then close the door again, slam it, and return to his chair to see what might happen next. Or he could flood the vault, right now, with gas. The hiss and repulsive odor would tell her just as clearly as a smile that something extraordinary was underway. He could do any of these things. He had to concentrate to hear the sobs from within. The airtight fittings, the iron walls, and the mineral wool insulation deadened most of the sound, but he had found with experience that if he listened at the gas pipe, he heard everything much more clearly. This was the time he most craved. It brought him a period of sexual release that seemed to last for hours, even though in fact the screams and pleading faded rather quickly. He filled the vault with gas, just to be sure.
I love that book.
Yeah. So if you like a lot of dark and interesting history, if you're one of those people who goes to a new city and immediately seeks out the ghost tour or the dark gothic history tour, and you like a little true crime, you should absolutely read this book.
It reminded me, like, the way he wrote it reminded me of In Cold Blood. Where it's like that true crime fiction, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, where it's, you know, a historical book, but it's written like it's fiction.
Yes.
Or true crime novel, I guess, is what they called it.
Well, yeah. But it's just, the impact of it is so much more than just laying down those facts.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because of that.
I guess I meant, like, the writing style that he wrote it in was kind of the writing style that he wrote it in. That was genius.
Yeah.
I guess I meant the style that he wrote it in reminded me of In Cold Blood.
Oh, was the same as, okay.
Yeah, like the
In Cold
lyrical prose, and here's what was going through his mind, and, you know, that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
But I definitely agree with you that it is just as much about the World's Fair as it is about the murders. But I don't know that it was necessarily advertised that way. I think maybe that's where some people got their mistaken ideas, was that it was advertised more as this serial killer who was killing while the World's Fair was also being constructed, instead of like an equal 50-50.
It's like they put, like, the peas in their mashed potatoes, you know?
Right. Right.
Like, here's some actual history to go in with your, like, dark murder story.
Right. Which is a really common literary, strategy.
It worked.
Oh, yeah, it works. It's worked over and over and over in history. Yeah, that's what kind of worries me about, though they've been talking about making a movie out of it for, like, years and years and years.
Yeah.
But I guess that Martin Scorsese wants to make it, and Leonardo DiCaprio wants to play H.H. Holmes, which, fine, but I feel like it's going to be 80% murder, 20% the World's Fair.
Oh, I think that's a given.
Though I don't know, because Gangs of New York, I don't know if you guys ever saw that.
Mm-mm.
That's another Scorsese movie. New York is a character as much as the other character, like the human characters. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I can't even talk today. I don't know what's happening. But
no, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, anyway, I guess we'll see, but that's a good choice because I love that book a lot. And you haven't read it, Miranda?
No, I have not.
Oh, put it on your list.
I will. I've heard of it before.
It's so good.
There's just so many books out there.
I know.
Yeah.
Too many.
So little time.
Too many.
All right. So, my second pick was Sleeping Beauties by Stephen and Owen King. It came out 2 years ago, 2017. This book it's so weird because it's not even like my favorite book in the entire world, but I still somehow managed to write my capstone project on it, which I know, like, you guys have probably written longer papers, but 23 pages was a lot for me because I haven't gone to grad school or anything. But this book is like 700 pages of content, so it would be hard for me to, like, condense it all right now with everything that's going on in it. But basically, Sleeping Beauties is about this event in which women, when they fall asleep, do not wake up. And they term the sickness Aurora. And Aurora causes these women to be encased in a cocoon. So the same moment that Aurora hits the world, a young woman named Eve Black also appears. And Aurora and Eve are clearly connected with one another. So Eve, one of my favorite things about this novel is that Eve is clearly, like, supposed to be like the biblical Eve character, except she is the exact opposite of biblical Eve. She's aggressive and violent. In, like, the very beginning of the book, she shoves a man's head through the wall of a trailer. It's very gory. Anyways, she almost knocked my laptop over. So Eve is one of my favorite things about the novel for many other reasons. But she's just completely different from the biblical Eve character. She's basically everything that I don't know how to say this without it sounding offensive, but, like, everything men are afraid of women being is who Eve is. Mm-hmm. So when the women actually end up waking up, they don't wake up in the world we started out in. They wake up in a mirror world that's been completely destroyed. And I think it's, like, the future. It's like some sort of future world in which the women stay asleep. But that isn't confirmed in the book. But basically, once the women fall asleep, it's mass chaos. Some of the men even say, like, they can't even function without the women. Like, they don't even know how to make their own food, which is obviously not necessarily accurate to reality, but I think it's just supposed to be funny. And some of the men even try to wake the women up, and when they do that, the women attack them and typically kill them. So it's very similar to The Stand by the end, except in this case you have one side is a group of men trying to kill Eve because they think it's going to wake all of the women up, and the other side is trying to keep her safe because she tells them that she's really the only hope in bringing the women back. So one thing about this book that, like, I had a hard time getting past is that it's very heavy-handed in some ways. There's a character whose name is Dawn, who is very, very clearly supposed to be Donald Trump. Like, it is the most obvious thing in the entire book. And so there are parts of it that's like, okay, it's a little much. You don't have to tell me that much. But the best parts of the book are the very nuanced things that you pick up and the little ways that you see toxic masculinity and sexism coming through in those small interactions with each other. And another really nice thing is that it's very clearly they very clearly distinguish between toxic masculinity really being the issue and not just like saying men are the problem. Like, screw men, they're all bad. It very clearly points to toxic masculinity as a problem because you see how it starts affecting some of the women as well, and the way toxic masculinity can also destroy women within themselves, basically. And we also see how men handle their problems, or toxically masculine men handle their problems versus women, where the men pretty much break into full-on anarchy. I mean, the world falls apart, basically. But the women, when they're in this mirror world, pretty much rebuild a very peaceful society. There's really no fights or problems for the most part, and they all have these unique talents in which they can create this society and be incredibly functional. So, and there's also a really strong environmental aspect to the book as well. It's not... Stephen and Owen King don't just stop at, like, what's socially relevant, like, how are we hurting each other and the community we live in, but also how toxic masculinity is harming the environment and the ways in which it's harming the environment. So I personally think, like, if you read this book and you start to feel like, okay, everything is so obvious in this book, please keep reading and give it more of a chance, because I do agree that there's a lot in it that you can just kind of roll your eyes at and be like, okay, like, chill. But there really is some really great stuff within this book if you really sit down and you read it and you really look into it, because I think they did some incredible things with it. But yeah, I recommend it. As long as you're willing to sit through, like, 600, 700 pages. It's a long-ass book. A lot happens in that book. But yeah, I love it. There were a lot of people who didn't like it. My dad didn't like it, but I really liked it. Yeah, I know.
3 guesses why? Or does he listen to this? Probably not.
Why wouldn't he like it? Anyways, yeah, it's fun. And one of the fun things about it is that animals talk in this book too. So you have these little chapters where, like, all the animals are talking, and they tend to be kind of sad. There's one chapter where, like, a fox is talking about how he, like, witnessed another fox die and stuff like that, and it's sad. It's very sad, all the environmental stuff that happens, but it's a good book. It's very good. I recommend it.
I liked it.
I have not read it, but I have it. I have it still with a bunch of other Stephen King books.
Yeah, I got it from the library. This was like the only book that I read when I was on maternity leave. And then I just bought it actually at the book rack. But I did like it. I think for me, I could tell the parts that Stephen King wrote and the parts that his son wrote.
Really?
And maybe that was one of the slight weaknesses of it to me, is that I don't think this son anyway, is as good of a writer as Joe or Steven, my close friends that I call by their first name. Yeah, I don't know. But I did really like it. I did really enjoy it. It took me a long time to read it. And I don't know if it's just because I was sleep deprived, which is totally possible, or if it just was a book that takes a long time to read, but I did enjoy it.
The first time I read it, I think I got through it pretty fast, but then when I had to read it my last semester and write a paper on it, oh my god, did it take forever. It was so bad. And I got to a point where I think at the end of the semester I didn't even want to look at the book again. But like now that I've had time away from it, I'm like, oh, I love this book. But yeah, after a while I was like, oh my god, I can't do this anymore.
I did that to myself this semester with 4 books that I just don't wanna
ever want to see again.
Terrible. Yeah. But also, this book is being turned into an AMC TV series, which I know you guys know, but I am super excited about it. At least they are signed on to do a pilot. We don't know for sure if it's going to be like a full series, but Stephen and Owen King are going to write a pilot for AMC. I am super excited. I can't wait. I'm a little nervous because Stephen King does not do well when he writes movies.
Not true. Creepshow is amazing. How dare you?
Oh, I haven't seen Creepshow. All I've seen is like Storm of the Century, which Storm of the Century is really bad. And then I didn't see The Shining, but I've heard that it's terrible.
That one was horrible. But
yeah,
I enjoyed Rose Red.
I don't even know if I've seen Rose Red.
I watched it when it was on, and then I rewatched it. I don't know, with my sister, like, shortly after Damian was born, and I still enjoyed it.
Okay. Alright, well, the ones that I am aware of, he didn't do so well with, but I don't know.
You should watch Creepshow. I own it. You can borrow it.
Yes, I need to see Creepshow. I do need to, but anyways. I am very excited, and I hope it goes over well, but it's going to be very, very socially and politically relevant, and I'm very scared for that. Because it's going to make a lot of people hate it.
Yeah, but, like, we don't want those people in the club anyway.
It's true.
No, we don't. And, like, it's so emerging lately everywhere that, like, it's hard for them to avoid. So they better, like, get with it or stop consuming all media together.
Yeah.
Well, I have a feeling that the comments that the book got are going to be the same as the show, because that's something that I included in my paper, was like everybody saying, I read books to enjoy books and to like get a break from the world. I don't read books that make me think about social and political stuff. It's like,
well, that's fine.
Have you read Stephen King before?
Well, and I'm sorry, but I feel like there are a lot of books in every single genre that make you think about the social and political world, including even, like, you know, people love to make fun of romance novels, but there are a lot of romance novels that deal with real world stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's you know, there are picture books that deal with the social and political world, so those people need to just, like, not read, I guess. Books were not made for them. I don't know what to tell them.
Yeah, I don't know what the deal was there. I thought it was so funny when I was looking them up for my paper. It's like,
right.
I feel like you've never read a Stephen King book before.
Or, like, a book at all.
Yeah.
Well, and also, like, books don't... I'm trying to get into a librarian's perspective about stuff like this. Books don't exist just for one purpose. They exist for multiple purposes.
Right.
And readers look for different things coming to them. So just because you go to books looking for something doesn't mean other readers don't need different things from them.
Right.
It's absurd.
It is.
It is absurd.
It is.
It is absurd. So my last pick is my nonfiction pick. So I chose a book that was published in 2017, Paperbacks from Hell by Grady Hendrix. This book is amazing for people who haven't read it. So this book is a history of 70s and 80s horror novels. Specifically, cheap paperback horror novels. He kind of gets into, like, how these, you know, how as horror movies started to move more into, like, the mainstream of, like, good movies and movies that were, like, box office hits, they spawned all of these cheap books trying to capitalize off of it, right? So every chapter in this book begins with either like an iconic horror novel or horror movie like The Omen or The Exorcist, and it talks like a little bit about that and then delves into all of the paperbacks that were basically rip-offs of these iconic works of horror that came out in the 70s and 80s. So he says in the book that he was inspired to write it when he found a paperback novel called The Little People. And The Little People is, I kid you not, about S&M obsessed Nazi dwarves.
What the fuck?
Is
yes.
that the term we're supposed to use?
Well, that's the term that they use in the book, even though the book is called The Little People, which little people is the term that you're supposed to use. But in the book, yes, it is. But in the book,
I wasn't sure because if we're going to keep talking about it, I needed to know.
No.
I was like,
yeah, no. Little people is the term that you're supposed to use, but dwarves is the term that they use in the book. So that's why I said that.
Gotcha.
But anyway, so reading this book basically led him down this rabbit hole to reading and analyzing all of these like shitty books that were just being like pumped out, right? And that they were just trying to make like as sensational as possible. So you have these like crazy covers, you have which you see a lot of in the book, you have these like crazy plot lines. And he also goes through and he ties what was popular in horror novels in certain decades to what was happening in the country at the time. So, for example, he says that, you know, one of the big tropes in horror in the 80s was Native American curses, right? Mm-hmm. Like Poltergeist. You built it on top of the burial ground, and now your house is being haunted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he ties that to the Cold War and the nuclear threat of apocalyptic fiction, which is almost a reflection of America's sins. So almost we deserve this nuclear holocaust because of what we did to these people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's another book called Ghostland by Colin Dickey that talks about all these hauntings in America and then tells us basically why we have to have those hauntings because we're guilty, basically.
Yes. And this kind
and
of does
says the same thing about that.
Except with books. It's not like true haunting stories or quote-unquote true. It's, you know, horror novels. And he brings, like, a parallel between, you know, like, the Satanic Panic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, The Exorcist, like, this idea of demonic possession being this terrifying thing to parents who didn't understand their teenagers. And so he does, like, a whole section on Gothic fiction. He does, like, a whole thing on V.C. Andrews. He does a thing on R.L. Stine. But one thing that I really like is that there are actually books that he found that are very good and that he really loves. And so he talks these books up. And he actually did such a good job with it. And this book was so popular with the horror community that this publisher, Valancourt, is 2018 to 2019 is relaunching 5 titles that were mentioned in this book, and they're in the paperbacks from Hell editions.
Really?
That's
yes,
awesome.
with like new cover art, and it's so cool. I know, it's amazing.
Was The Elementals by Michael McDowell one of those books?
He does talk about that one, yes.
Okay, yeah, because I haven't read Paperbacks from Hell, but I know about it, and I plan to read it. But somehow I found that this book from the 70s or 80s was reissued, and it has new cover art, and I read it because it's starting to resurface, and I wondered if that was one of the reasons it was resurfacing, was because of
You know, I
Grady
don't...
Hendrix.
It may have been, because I actually read the Elementals before I read this book, but
Oh.
I feel like around the time I read it was around the time... I just got this book for Christmas, so I just read it like a month ago, but I feel like around the time that I read the Elementals was around the time this book came out, so that probably is what led to it being more in, like, the public consciousness, because I found it on some thread of, like, horror books that you recommend, you know? Yeah. So I it probably did come from this. And then another thing that's great in this book is that he does some biographies of the artists behind some of this insane cover art.
Oh.
Which is really neat, because there are some authors that, or I'm sorry, artists that, like, no one had ever heard of. Like, their biography had never been written in print. And he tracks these people down and writes these biographies of them and kind of how they came up with this, like, bananas, these covers, which were just, like, if you flip through the book, these covers are crazy. And I guess the only downside of it is that if you read it, your to be read list will grow by like 1 million.
Oh no.
Like,
Oh,
even
God.
like, I want to read The Little People. That sounds insane and horribly offensive, and like, how can I not want to read it? And there is a book in it called Brother Kind, which I had forgotten was in this until I found this article on the AV Club, like a review of this book that I was reading. And it says that Brother Kind by J.N. Williamson is about a parapsychologist who stops a race of... The writer uses the word midget, which I know we're not supposed to use. So, but I'm just quoting from the article, so no one freak out. I'm quoting, this is a direct quote, about a parapsychologist who stops a race of midget aliens from turning Earth into one giant intergalactic gangbang through the power of Kiss. As in the rock band.
What?
There's a lot going on there.
Yes. I feel like I have to track that book down.
Yeah.
How can I not read it? How could you not read that book? How could you hear that plot summary and not be like, wow, that's for me?
I wonder how well it's written.
Horribly, probably. I mean, how could it be written well?
But what if...
I don't think Shakespeare could take that plot and make it well written.
That's fair.
I mean, through the power of Kiss, the rock band, it just sounds so amazing. And again, I feel like, how could you not... But I'm also the kind of person who will see that a movie has, like, a 5% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm like, how can I not watch it? It only has a 5.
Yeah, I can't do that.
I have to. It's like I'm compelled. So that's how I feel about the books in this book, is like, I'm compelled to read some of them because they sound so bananas.
Mm-hmm.
They just sound like, how did someone pay somebody to write that? And why am I not making money by writing that kind of stuff? Like, I feel like I should be on Amazon right now doing, like, the Kindle books for 99 cents.
You can, and you just have to turn out a shit ton of them. People make money.
Oh my
crazy on
god,
that
I
shit.
know. There's, like, dinosaur porn and, like, all kinds of... Miranda, you look horrified. I'm going to send you some links. There's, like,
I don't think I want links.
No. There's really funny, like, summaries of them online, like, recaps of them online that are very funny.
Oh my god.
But, yeah, anyway, so this kind of reminds me of almost what you're seeing with these, like we were just saying, crazy Kindle books that are coming out, where people are just, like, pumping them out, right? They're coming out with a new book, like, every 2 days. And who cares if it's good, because they know that people are going to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's only 99 cents, and it's a trend right now. And they know there's an audience for it somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the idea behind the publishers making these books. And Grady Hendrix is a great writer. He's hysterical. I have read 2 of his other books, Horror Store, which is great, My Best Friend's Exorcism, which is like one of my top 5 favorite horror books that I've read ever. I love it. And then he has a new one out that I haven't read yet called We Sold Our Souls, but I'm very excited to read it. So yeah, I recommend this. I recommend everything that he's written. Someday we will do a topic that will let me talk about My Best Friend's Exorcism, and I'm very excited for that day.
That was a good one to end on.
Mm-hmm.
Listeners, if you have book recommendations for us, we've probably read them, but whatever. Just make you feel included.
No! Oh no!
Email us, or message us, or tweet at us.
Mm-hmm.
You probably won't want to now that I said that.
She was kidding.
I wasn't, but
I probably haven't read anything you recommend, so don't worry. Rachel, I can't promise.
Like, don't tell me to read The Haunting of Hill House when I ask you for gothic novel recommendations. Come on, guys.
Yeah, and for me personally, I say the more obscure horror novels, the better. Like, anything that you think that people don't ever talk about or don't talk about as much as it deserves, send those, because I love reading books that I've never heard of or that I never ever ever would have found if some random person didn't tell me, hey, this book is really good. And then I pick it up and read it, and oh my god, it's amazing.
There should be more books just recommending other books. Like,
There really should.
like Paperbacks from Hell and Dance Macabre. Just more.
Well, at the end of On Writing, Stephen King has a long-ass list of books people should read, so
That is true, he does.
there's
I
that.
forgot about that.
Yeah.
And if anyone follows Guillermo del Toro on Twitter, he's constantly tweeting out book recommendations that he loves.
I love
Book
that
and
man.
movie recommendations.
He's the
I
best.
shouldn't follow him. Because although I brag about having read stuff, like, mostly I own it, but haven't read it. So.
Oh my gosh.
No, it's I really like him too. But
Mhm.
yeah, so if anyone's looking for good book recommendations, or if you think that you want another book recommendation from us, send us an email. We'll be happy to give you book recommendations. If you tell us what you like. We all used to work at a bookstore. Nikki currently works at a library. So we're all book people.